Sponsored by NordVPN. Android laptops have been a thing for longer than you might think. Sure, Qualcomm and Google might be preparing to launch the first proper Android-powered notebooks in 2026, but did you know the earliest examples of this OS being shoehorned onto this kind of computer date back more than a decade and a half? You might remember the ASUS Transformer tablet that could drop into a keyboard dock, or various convertible efforts by Lenovo, but no, those are far too recent and frankly far too competently executed for this video. Because today we're going to look at one of the very first and arguably very worst Android laptops from the darkest depths of the year 2010. This right here is the Toshiba AC100. It was released in the middle of that year running Android 2.1 Eclair on an NVIDIA Tegra 250 CPU inside of what is essentially a pretty typical netbook chassis. A quick sidebar for those of you who aren't rapidly drifting towards middle age, netbooks were a specific breed of miniature, low-cost laptops that were briefly popular around the mid-2000s, before being killed off by the 1-2 punch of ultrabooks like the MacBook Air on one side and tablets like the iPad on the other. The branding on the box hails it as the ultimate web companion, while the stickers on the unit itself, still stuck in place 15 years after its release, hail its battery life, instant on functionality thanks to that Android OS, and then I guess they kind of ran out of ideas because the other two are read and share documents and LED email notification. What a time to be alive. The AC100 spec sheet actually is not too shabby for the time though. NVIDIA's Tegra 250 was more than quick enough to run basic Android apps and games, half a gig of RAM was standard for the time, and storage could be configured up to a roomy 32 gigs, plus you've got a full-size SD slot there for expansion. Toshiba's weirdo Android computer launched towards the end of the netbook era, and although it wasn't the very first laptop to be announced with Android, there was one announced in 2009 that never shipped, and some others that ran Android as a secondary instant on interface alongside Windows as the main OS, but this is the earliest laptop I could find that actually launched with a 100% Android software experience. This chunky plasticky number has withstood the past 15 years shockingly well, possibly a sign that it's not seen all that much use during that time, and that is probably because, well, this is an objectively terrible product, mainly for reasons related to its software, as we'll get into in a little bit. CNET gave it 1 star out of 5 in 2010, calling it an impractical curio that no one should spend their money on. And having spent money on this myself, I have to say, yeah, not wrong. It is actually impressive how bad of a computer this is, even if you were going to be using it back in 2010. Something I've learned looking into retro tech over the past few months is just how insecure everything was back in the day. But don't kid yourself into thinking that you're automatically protected just because you don't live in 240p land. Security and privacy threats are more common and more dangerous than ever before, and that's where this video's sponsor comes in. NordVPN is the best VPN service for online security, and now you can get up to 77% off a 2-year plan plus 3 months for free. Nord is one of the fastest VPNs in the world, with speeds of up to 6,700 megabits per second. It adds an extra layer of protection to your daily internet use by encrypting your traffic, shielding your online activity from hackers and snoopers, especially useful if you travel a lot or use public Wi-Fi. And you can appear as if you're virtually anywhere in the world, with servers in over 126 locations. NordVPN also comes with an integrated anti-malware tool and continuous dark web monitoring, so you'll know about any leaked credentials before the bad guys do. A single plan covers 10 devices and all major platforms are supported, so head to nordvpn.com/xda to get up to 77% off a 2-year plan plus 3 months for free. Thanks to Nord for sponsoring, now back to the video. Being a netbook, on the outside, it feels pretty cheap, clad in variously textured black plastic with a snazzy orange accent colour. It's rugged and portable and very much a time capsule of this era in computing, with a removable battery, lightweight, and a 10.1-inch display on the inside. It feels pretty chintzy and cheap, but then 99% of netbooks did back in the day. As a basic 2000s era LCD, the display has some of the worst viewing angles I have ever seen, to the point where looking even slightly off-axis at this makes it completely wash out. There are some surprises connectivity-wise though, like full-sized HDMI and SD card slots alongside USB-A, mini USB-B, which is certainly a choice. But that HDMI, by the way, is limited to display mirroring. Obviously, you're not going to be running multiple desktops off this Android 2 based system. But let's move on from the pretty typical cheapo netbook externals and into what turns this from yet another cheap laptop into a true catastrophe of a computer. It's the software. Oh boy, that software. The AC100 shipped with Android 2.1 Eclair before getting an update to 2.2 Froyo. That's the version mine is running right now because, like most Android devices of this era, it only got one single software update. Also, no Google Play Store, Android Market, or any of that stuff. This is not a Google certified device. It runs the open source version of Android with Toshiba's UI layer on top. Presumably because even the Google of 2010 wouldn't have certified such a janky software experience on such a mismatched piece of hardware. Now, the Android of the 2020s obviously is very much at home on larger displays and even has a pretty robust desktop mode. But this is the Android of 2010 we're talking about, where it's still very much just a phone OS, and a basic phone OS at that. And you can see that from the second you start using this interface. I guess you can say an attempt was made, but still, the experience here is so slapdash that I'm genuinely amazed it was ever approved for sale in this or any other decade. Firstly, Android is a touch-first OS, but this isn't a touchscreen laptop, so you're limited to using this tiny trackpad to control your mouse pointer. There's no support for right-click context menus, instead that button acts like the old Android menu key. To switch between home screens, you need to awkwardly click and drag or use the arrow keys. Selecting text in order to copy-paste in most apps is basically impossible. There's no quick settings menu, so even basic tasks like changing the brightness level requires you to go spelunking into the main settings app or activate a home screen widget. You can't tab between text fields in any app. Hitting the tab key inserts a tab character into whichever field is selected, so you need to use that tiny trackpad to jump from one field to the next. Multitasking is painful with no Alt-Tab style quick shortcut, and hopping between recent apps requires a long press of a physical home key. While swiping down on the right edge of the trackpad will let you scroll, there's no pinch to zoom functionality included in any apps that I could see. And because it's not Google certified, there's no Android Market or Google Play Store, so you could sideload, or there were two preloaded app stores on board, both of which are now out of action. So why even create such an abomination then? Why bring Android on a Tegra chip to a device of this form factor? The biggest reason is the one that still applies to ARM-based computers today: efficiency and battery life. And that was one of the main selling points of this machine. Toshiba says this thing could run for up to 8 hours of active use, which is double what you get out of an x86 netbook. Those aren't head-turning numbers today, but it was a big deal 15 years ago. Most netbooks of this era ran Intel Atom chips, which, although more efficient than a typical laptop CPU, were still pretty power-hungry compared to something like the Tegra powering this machine. And second is cellular data. Behind its battery, the AC100 has a full-sized physical SIM slot for connecting to 3G data. That's something I couldn't really test, as 3G networks are well on the way to being shut down here in the UK and a lot of other countries. But hey, at least this thing did actually get a platform update during its lifetime, bringing it up to Android 2.2 with, amongst other things, performance improvements and Adobe Flash support. This was a bigger deal than you might think, because at the time, basically all web video ran through the Flash plugin, and the Android version of Flash required version 2.2 of the OS. Even if you were just using it exclusively to watch 2010s era web video though, the general experience of navigating around open source Android 2.2 with a keyboard and trackpad is so littered with friction and pain points that you'd really be better off with something like an early phablet such as the Dell Streak or the original Samsung Galaxy Tab. For the internet of 2025, obviously this machine is even less useful than it was a decade and a half prior, the biggest problems being outdated SSL certificates in both the stock Android browser and the lightweight Opera mobile version. Most of the online platforms attached to the other apps on this computer have also been shut down. Even the document viewer here redirects you most of the time just to a blank web page. It's kind of a shame because the main reason this product is such a mess is entirely software related, which means it is potentially fixable. Again, I've got to say, it's amazing this thing made it out of the ideas stage, let alone all the way to production and retail. It's probably the most frustrating laptop I've ever used, and the worst Android device I've ever seen. While its ARM internals meant that it could boast better battery life than other netbooks, really, who is going to want to use this thing for up to 8 hours at a time? Pretty early on, people who bought this thing started finding out ways to put a real desktop OS onto it, because the Tegra chip certainly had the power to run proper desktop Linux even back in the day. Obviously, these distros are pretty old in 2025, but you can get a feel here how a full desktop OS really unlocks the capabilities of this hardware. Laptops generally, and Android particularly, have come a long way in the past 15 years. Android now runs on everything from fridges to cars, and with the merging of Chrome OS into Android, we're finally about to see it emerge as something that could potentially rival traditional notebooks. That's it for now. Let me know what you think of this oddity down in the comments. Let me know if you owned anything like this back in the day and what your hopes are for Android laptops going into 2026. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to drop us a like or a sub if you think we've earned it, and do all the engagement related things to keep the algorithmic gods at bay. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.